The sound of high heels struck sharply against the marble floor. Each step echoed off the towering glass walls of VaughnCorp headquarters, home to one of America's largest media conglomerates. The opulent lobby felt like a runway show without a stage, flawless suits, indifferent glances, and an atmosphere saturated with power. And amidst all that perfection, there was one figure that didn't fit. A young woman in a worn-out silver-gray janitor's uniform. Brown hair, neatly tied back hands, reddened from harsh cleaning chemicals. She knelt, wiping each speck of dust from the floor, as if she had laid each tile herself. No one looked at her. No one remembered she was there. Until thud. An overpriced cup of coffee dropped right in front of her. Liquid splattered across her uniform, spreading like a bloodstain. The entire lobby froze. A woman stepped forward, her heels struck the floor like a gavel. Red lipstick, white coat, and a voice that didn't need a microphone to slice through the air. "What did you just do to my coffee?" Silence. The janitor looked up, brown eyes, not panicked, not afraid, but that gaze, it made the woman scowl as if it had offended her. "This is a high-level area. Janitors are not allowed near VIP seating, let alone using it." All eyes turned. A few employees chuckled. Some quietly recorded on their phones. The girl stood upright, still gripping her mop, a thin line of blood trickling from her wrist where a shard of glass had grazed her. "If you're here to clean trash, don't mistake yourself for anything more. This isn't a fairy tale. This is VaughnCorp. There's no seat here for Cinderella. A perfect public humiliation." One by one, the onlookers turned away, returning to their cold, curated lives. But there was something they didn't know. That girl, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply bent down, gathering the broken pieces of porcelain as gently as if they could still feel pain. Then she stood, walked slowly across the hall, and headed straight for the executive elevator, the one strictly reserved for upper management. And just as the doors slid shut, a staff member stammered, "Wait, why did her janitor badge unlock the exec lift?" No one answered. But on the 33rd floor, a classified level with only 4 authorized personnel, a closed-door meeting had just been summoned. And added to the attendee list that very morning, Naomi Vaughn, the nominal owner of the entire conglomerate, 3 weeks before that fateful morning. On the desk of the HR department on the 8th floor, a new job application was pushed into the internal system. They skimmed through it. Nina Wallace, 28 years old, a former cleaner at 3 factories, had an unimpressive resume, no interview needed, and was assigned to the night shift. But no one, not even the resume screening software, noticed that the photo in the file had been altered by hand. No one knew Nina Wallace didn't exist. She was a name created on a drizzly night when a woman sat alone in her late father's old office, the founder of VaughnCorp, who had passed away less than 60 days earlier. Naomi Vaughn, his only daughter once hailed as the golden heir, had vanished without a trace after the family tragedy. The press claimed she was undergoing treatment in Switzerland. Inside the company, rumors spread that she wasn't strong enough to take over. No one thought she had returned. No one imagined that instead of walking into the shareholders' meeting in a designer dress with the title of CEO, she had chosen to wear a hard hat, don gloves, and enter the very building bearing her family's name through the service entrance at 4 a.m. If you want to know who people really are, let them think you're no one. That was why Naomi did it. Because after her father's death, she discovered something more terrifying than grief. The legacy he left behind was being corroded by the very people who once called him mentor, friend, and visionary. Naomi didn't choose revenge. She chose observation. In 3 weeks as a janitor, Naomi witnessed things no CEO ever would. She saw a female employee denied promotion because her face didn't match the brand. She saw a receptionist get scolded for asking whether a visitor had an appointment. She saw an elderly night janitor forced into unpaid overtime simply because the budget ran out. Worse, she saw fear in the eyes of the good and a slick arrogance in the smiles of the powerful. Naomi began to take notes, but not on a computer. In a leather-bound notebook, each page written by hand in black ink, just like the way her father had once recorded his first business philosophy: if one day you must choose between being right and being strong, choose what's right, because time will always side with it. And in the dim basement, after everyone had left and the elevators stopped running, Naomi, in a uniform that reeked of chemicals, sat alone, in silence. She didn't cry. She simply stared up at the ceiling and wondered how many of them once knew they were wrong, but chose silence because it was easier to survive. 27th floor, a zone reserved strictly for senior executives. Working hours had long ended. The overhead lights dimmed one by one with the motion sensors, and the entire office seemed to slip into sleep. But Naomi knew it was in these unlit rooms that true power spoke. She walked slowly down the side hallway, breathing softly the scent of bleach, still clinging to her rubber gloves. Ahead, one door was left ajar. Inside, a faint yellow glow, and a familiar voice: "I'm serious. As long as we keep those low-level employees around, this company will never surpass a 7% growth ceiling. We need fresh blood." It was Grant Whitmore, the CFO, the same man who once shook her father's hand before every major press conference. A second voice cut in cold and metallic: "Just get rid of the new grads. No experience, always asking questions. I don't hire ambitious people. I hire people who know how to shut up." Naomi held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. Her hand rested on the mop as if clinging to the only thing still real. And then, the former CEO. That whole humanitarian vision died with him. Exactly. We're not selling ideals. We're selling the ability to manipulate markets. Laughter erupted. Not loud, not boastful. It was the kind of laugh that comes from men who've committed unethical acts so many times they no longer feel the weight of them. Naomi felt a chill run through her bones. But what made her skin crawl even more was hearing her own name spoken. And his daughter, Naomi. She's just a sentimental myth. Trust me, if she ever comes back, I'll make sure she signs her own refusal of inheritance on grounds of incompetence. Silence. Then the soft clink of glasses, the sound of men toasting to the death of a name that hadn't even had a chance to return. Naomi turned away quietly. She didn't cry, but her hands were stone. Now she knew. This was no longer her father's company. This was a stage where people learned to act like saints and weaponize kindness as weakness. A few minutes later, Naomi sat alone in the janitor's break room. On the table lay the black leather notebook. She wrote down 3 more names. For the first time, her handwriting trembled slightly. On the final page, she boxed in a single line, written in red, all uppercase: "They don't see me. But I see everything." Basement level B3 of VaughnCorp was a place without cameras, not because of budget cuts, but because no one cared about a storage area filled with broken printers, old files, and forgotten junk. Yet it was there, among hundreds of dusty boxes and flickering fluorescent lights, that felt like a scene from a 90s movie, that Naomi Vaughn unfolded her very first strategic map. On a gray concrete wall, she pinned up dozens of sticky notes, yellow, red, and blue, marking key individuals, suspicious behaviors, and obscure links within the system. Red: dangerous, High power, low ethics. Yellow neutral. Observers unpredictable. Blue potential. Those who still held on to their humanity. The wall looked like an internal investigation board. But this wasn't a game. Naomi pinned the first name Grant Whitmore, the CFO, the man who called her father an emotional legend. His connections were traced to questionable budget allocations and 3 personally loyal hiring supervisors. Next was Vivian Mears, the woman who humiliated her in the grand lobby. Officially in charge of PR, but Naomi discovered she had worked at an ad agency with covert financial ties to Whitmore. Then came Seth Connors, head of legal, the man who always said everything will be handled discreetly. But how discreet could it be when over 22 employee complaints in the last 6 months had all been inconclusive? Naomi told no one. She didn't complain, she simply mapped each link with precision, like a chess player who didn't need a board. Then one Friday night, long after the office lights went out, Naomi stood in front of her wall. Pen in hand, she added one more note: blue, Marcus Lane. It's staff. Quiet, avoids eye contact, but never laughs when others are being humiliated. For the first time, Naomi chose to trust someone, just one person. And if she was wrong, the consequence wouldn't just be a collapsed map, but the exposure of her true identity. Monday morning, in the tiny break room, Marcus found a note inside his desk drawer. No name, no explanation. Just a line that read, "If you see what I see, leave a cup of mint tea on the desk at 5:47 p.m. If not, I understand." That afternoon, exactly at 5:47, Naomi returned to the break room. On the table, no note, no message, just a cup of mint tea, still warm. The mint tea was still warm. Placed neatly on the small break room table behind the technical floor, it bore no note, no signature, no one waiting. But to Naomi Vaughn, it spoke louder than any written oath. In a world where promises were typed in emails and erased with a single click, a silent cup of tea might be the only thing that was real. Naomi knew that moment marked a threshold between solitude and alliance, between observation and action. Marcus Lane, the quiet IT man with a thin frame and the habit of wearing headphones even when no music played, was waiting for her in the old tech room, a space wrapped in network cables like spiderwebs steeped in a scent of metal and time. He didn't greet her, didn't ask anything. He simply placed a scratched black USB in front of her, the words written in correction fluid crookedly across its surface. Not data. A confession. Naomi didn't ask if he was sure. She plugged it in, and the screen opened up to the world behind VaughnCorp's polished mask. The first file was about Camille Tran, 23 years old, an intern dismissed for not fitting the brand image. The final line in the internal note read cold as a sentence. Not retained. Lacks commercial appeal. Naomi continued opening each file as if peeling back layers of makeup from the company that bore her father's name. File 11, Jorge Valdez, maintenance team leader, 54 years old, had reported being forced into unpaid night shifts. Note: strong Latin temperament. Difficult to manage. Naomi felt her hand tighten. Not because of the callous words, but because of the inhuman ease with which they were written, if people were just costs to be eliminated. "When did you start saving all this?" Naomi asked without looking up. Marcus replied in his usual flat tone, "The day I saw a creative director tell an intern, 'If you want to stay, wear tighter skirts.' She quit the next day." I opened a hidden folder. Naomi looked up at the man across from her. There was no fire of outrage, no cries for justice, just the stillness of someone exhausted from pretending not to see. And that was what made her believe him. He opened another file, a presentation slide never meant to be seen. Codename VC Refresh. A brand restructuring plan that sounded clean and modern, but in truth was a strategy to eliminate over 300 employees based on appearance, race, or background deemed aesthetic misfits for media. 83% on the list were Asian Black or had visible disabilities. The reason, hard to sell image. Naomi let out a dry laugh, like cold wind brushing across a gravestone. She spoke low and firm. They want to clean up the company. Fine, but this time we'll do the cleaning for real, top to bottom. That night, Naomi returned to the basement, where her covert wall map was still growing night by night. She added a blue sticky note, the color she used for rare trust in this world. It carried only one name, written in bold black ink, Marcus Lane. But Naomi didn't know. On another floor inside what seemed like an abandoned tech room, a fingertip-sized recording device had been active for 2 months. On a secret screen, the footage of her and Marcus sitting across from each other, exchanging data, played in deadly silence. A ringed finger touched the record button, and a man's voice emerged from the darkness, low and quiet. Like a prophecy, the game has officially begun. Some players never appear on the power map. No seat at the boardroom table, no name in the HR directory, and yet they're present in every crucial decision, as if every budget line, every internal email were transcribed from a book only they possess. They called him by many nicknames: the Whisper, the Silent Advisor, the man behind the glass wall. But no one dared say his real name. And Naomi knew when a man holds power without a title, without showing up, he is no longer a manager. He is a manipulator. 3 days after forming her alliance with Marcus, Naomi received a hidden system file restored by Marcus from a wiped hard drive. It was encrypted with 3 layers, but inside wasn't a document. It was a journal, a series of internal memos exchanged between senior executives. One excerpt sent a chill down her spine. Don't dig too deep. The terminations were approved from level 1. If there's an issue, escalate to EK. HR policies don't need to be logical, just legally presentable. EK doesn't want another leak. Naomi Vaughn is back in the country, doesn't matter. If she opens her mouth, remember, the Sicily file still has her signature from when she was 17. Naomi froze. Sicily. Years ago, she and her father had faced a media disaster in Italy, a failed project buried under PR. She thought the file had been erased completely, but it hadn't. Someone kept it, and now it sat like a blade at her throat, waiting for her to raise her head. EK. No such name in the employee database, no company email under that identity. Yet in Marcus's recovered data, the name appeared over and over like a phantom. All contracts must be silently approved by EK. Don't send the real financials. Send the EK safe version. EK won't be pleased if there's internal unrest before Q4. Naomi searched the entire system record of EK. She asked Marcus. He only shook his head. EK is an alias. Nobody knows who it is. But once I saw Grant Whitmore take an international call and mutter, "Yes, sir, Mr. E," then he wiped his entire meeting calendar for the next 72 hours. That night, Naomi stood alone before her hidden wall map. Beneath the web of executives, directors, assistants, lawyers, she drew a large circle. No photo, no detail, just one red ink symbol. EK, position shadow tier, power absolute. Objective maintain control through fear. She knew if she wanted to dismantle this system, it wasn't enough to strike the players on stage. She would have to drag the scriptwriter into the light. But just as Naomi pinned the final sheet to the wall, the lights in the room went out. In a single second, the entire basement sank into darkness. No hum of machines, no rush of air, Only one soft click, like a camera shutter. Naomi spun around. No one there. But on the table beside her notebook, a new sheet of paper had appeared, one she hadn't written. Black ink, left-handed, slanted right. I'm impressed by your observation skills, Naomi. But remember, those who wander too deep into the maze are usually the ones who never make it back. Naomi didn't move. She didn't breathe. She didn't tremble. She simply stared at the page and understood. From this moment forward, she was no longer the observer. She had been seen. And the true game of power had only just begun. 1 week after receiving the note signed, Naomi realized the battlefield had changed. No more cold hallways, no more public humiliations or old-fashioned power plays. Now she wasn't attacked head-on, she was suffocated, slowly beat by beat through invisible blows. The system still allowed her to exist, but only as a fading shadow. Her employee badge still scanned, but her emails constantly failed. Her internal account disappeared from the official directory, and most disturbingly, no one admitted to having changed anything. It was as if an unseen hand was quietly erasing her from reality without leaving a trace. Marcus tried to trace the system, but found nothing. It's like another layer controls this one, but no one knows where it is, he said quietly. Naomi shivered. A soft chime rang from her screen. Not an email, not a message, just a block of text with no sender. Don't trust him, he's just part of the test. Below is a link. She clicked. A leaked file appeared. Marcus Lane, previously suspended at his former company for allegedly leaking data. A short, cut-off audio clip played. If I hand over the file, I want my share. At the bottom, be honest, Naomi. The first person you chose to trust was the cheapest one. Naomi didn't react, but something inside her cracked, not because her trust wavered, but because she understood exactly what weapon EK was wielding: seeded doubt. That night she entered the tech room where Marcus was waiting. Without a word, she placed the leaked dossier on the table. Marcus looked once. No denial, no evasion. Not real, he said calmly. Naomi asked directly, did you work at Reynolds and Hunt? Yes, I was suspended, but because I reported illegal data storage. Right after that, they initiated an ethics investigation on me. He gave a bitter smile. A clean way to fire someone, no blood on their hands. Naomi didn't reply, but that night, when she returned to the basement, something had changed. The blue sticky note labeled Marcus had been torn away from her wall map. Only 2 people had ever entered that room. She stood still, staring at the wall, feeling herself drawn deeper into a maze where every light had been rewired to point in the wrong direction. And somewhere in that maze, someone was controlling the light. In a covert surveillance room, EK watched the black and white monitors, his eyes unblinking. His voice traveled through the phone line she's about to crack. Even the strongest break when they no longer know who to trust. On the other end, a woman let out a soft laugh. You're cruel. No, EK replied, I am merely the reflection of justice, as seen by those in power. The next day, Naomi received an anonymous video, no sound, no timestamp, showing Marcus entering level B1 at midnight, where the high-security servers were stored. No one was allowed access. No camera confirmed the date or time. But someone wanted her to see this. Someone wanted to break something inside her. Naomi sat in the break room, holding the printed still frame, but her eyes didn't stop there. She no longer looked at Marcus. She looked inward at herself. A question started burning, corroding her like acid on bare skin. If I can no longer be sure who's on my side, do I even know who I am anymore? That night, Naomi climbed to the 33rd floor, her father's old office. She unlocked the door with the key hidden inside her pendant. Inside, everything remained untouched. Since the last time he sat there, the leather chair, the fountain pen, the photo of the two of them at their first press conference. Naomi didn't turn on the lights. She sat down, and for the first time in months, she cried, not from weakness, not from despair, but because she realized she no longer knew anyone she could cry in front of without fearing they'd turn her tears into a knife. 3:17 a.m. The phone vibrated. Naomi opened her eyes, head still heavy after a night drowned in doubt. The screen didn't show a number, only a strange phrase, restricted signal, internal bounce. It was a routing code used in VaughnCorp's internal system, something she had seen only once before 5 years ago, when her father took an urgent call from a person you could never call back. She answered, no static, no breathing. Just a few seconds of silence before a voice spoke low, calm, and so clear it made her sit upright. Naomi Vaughn, if you still believe your father died of a stroke, then this is not a game you should continue playing. A man's voice, American, middle-aged, unemotional, but every word cut through the fog like a knife. Naomi didn't respond. She sat still listening, like a wild animal catching its first glimpse of a trap. He knew about Level 1, about EK, about how VaughnCorp, once a media company, had become a front for illegal lobbying contracts, and he prepared files to expose it. The voice paused. Unfortunately, on that morning, the tea he usually drank contained 3 times the prescribed dose of beta blockers. Naomi felt her heart seize. No one except the family doctor and herself knew her father was on heart medication. No one knew he was hypersensitive to high doses. And no one except an insider had access to his morning routine. But then came the part that chilled her deeper. I'm not calling to warn you. I'm calling to test you. If you continue the investigation, I will appear. But only once. In the elevator frosted glass, 28th floor. No cameras. 43 seconds. I'll ask you one question. If you answer correctly, I'll hand over a copy of the file your father hid. If not, I'll disappear, and you'll die just like him. A polished death. One no one remembers. The call ended. No chance to reply. No option to trace. The screen only read, connection terminated. Mirror port 3A. Naomi didn't go back to sleep. She stood up, turned on the light, and opened the black leather notebook. For the first time in months, she didn't write with a pen, but with blood, from a cut on her fingertip, just as her father had done when he vowed silence during his first investigation. There is something that killed him, and I won't let it kill me quietly. The next day, at exactly 2:00 p.m., Naomi stood inside the elevator on the 28th floor, just as the voice had instructed. Frosted glass, no cameras, no foot traffic. She looked through the haze and saw a man in ordinary business attire, wearing glasses, carrying a briefcase, a face so forgettable it felt deliberate. As the doors were about to close, he stepped in. No eye contact, no greeting. He simply asked one question, quick, cold, and painfully precise. If you had a document proving that 4 of 7 board members work for EK, would you release it or use it to negotiate? Naomi didn't breathe. She hadn't expected the question to cut this deep. She had prepared for everything except this choice. The doors began to open. She had seconds left. Then she answered clearly, without hesitation, I would release it. Not for the company, but for those buried beneath its marble floors. The man turned toward her, for the first time, making eye contact. No surprise, no approval, no disdain, just a look of assessment. When the elevator stopped at the 32nd floor, he stepped out. But before the doors closed, he placed a USB into her hand. No note, no label, just an unmarked drive. And one final sentence: EK doesn't fear the truth being exposed. He fears someone exposing it and surviving. The doors slid shut. Naomi stood still. Her heart was pounding. But in her hand, she now held the first key to unlock a door the entire system had spent years trying to keep sealed. Naomi sat alone in the tech room on level B3, once a graveyard for broken printers, now the covert command center for a war only she and a few daring names even acknowledged. On the table lay the unmarked USB she had received the day before, so ordinary it was almost dull, yet she knew what it contained wasn't data. It was dynamite. She disconnected all networks, shut down every external port, and inserted the USB into an isolated laptop. No folders appeared, only a single file labeled 72REL. No title, no hints, no escape. She opened it. The screen immediately went black. Then lines of code began to stream, nothing like administrative reports, but more like the operational framework of a military-grade system. After 10 seconds, a graphical interface loaded a grid map, black background, gray lattice, and dots in red, blue, yellow, and white, all connected by fine threads, intertwined like neural pathways in a human brain. This wasn't an org chart. It was VaughnCorp's true power map. She saw the names she had long suspected: Grant Whitmore, Vivian Mears, Sienna Walsh, all clustered in the same node, EK, aligned, dependent, easily controlled. Each name had a secondary code, the size of their hush payouts, the perks they were granted for staying silent, and most chilling, stored personal weaknesses as leverage. Some had tax issues, others buried scandals, and some secrets from their pasts so damaging that their careers and marriages would collapse in a single day if exposed. Naomi didn't know whether to feel rage, revulsion, or fear. But what she found next threw her pulse entirely off course. A secondary tab opened suppression files, cases closed. Inside were 19 names: former employees, former executives, people once hailed as the cultural pillars of VaughnCorp. Each had voluntarily retired or stepped down for personal reasons. But in the confidential notes, one line repeated coldly: "Target knew more than allowed. Clean removal. No noise." Naomi trembled when she saw the name Harold Halbrook, her father's closest friend, once regional production director for Asia. He once told her how her father had cried turning down a tobacco contract, because that's the kind of thing that kills people too poor to say no. Harold had vanished last year, leaving behind only a post on social media. "Thanks for the memories." Naomi had thought he had retired to the countryside, but now she knew he didn't leave. He was erased. She scrolled to the bottom. Case number 20, redacted. No name, no photo, no date, only one note: unsuccessful. Target resisted. Request escalation to SS. She had seen that symbol before. The center of the map, the unnamed power node. She clicked it. A series of diagrams unfolded, multi-layered spirals like a blueprint of a labyrinth. Every internal decision is routed through S. But S held no title, no photo, no geographical location. Only a line of text: primary decision asset, not on official structure. Naomi held her breath. She zoomed into the grid. A portion of the map was blurred, partially encrypted, but still readable through the reflected light algorithm. She adjusted the screen contrast and tilted the desk lamp. An image emerged: a dark boardroom, captured by a hidden camera showing only 4 figures, but the one in the center froze Naomi in place. It was her grandfather, Elliot Vaughn. The man was once called the founding soul of VaughnCorp. The man who once told her, The world will never be fair, but you must be the one to make it less cruel. In the image, he held a folder titled Project Silence, Legacy Dismantled. At the bottom, italicized in red, approved by S. Naomi couldn't believe her eyes. He was S. It couldn't be. The man who once carried her on his shoulders, who brought her to the launch of their first news station, was the same man who authorized the erasure of everyone loyal to her father. She turned to the next page. A short, grainy audio clip, but the voice was unmistakably, his Arthur was too soft. He believed ethics could protect a corporation from being consumed. But ethics are for press conferences, not boardrooms. To keep VaughnCorp alive, you sacrifice what's right to preserve what survives. And if Naomi doesn't understand that, then she'll learn the way her father never got the chance to. Naomi shot up from her chair. She was no longer cold. She was burning as though her blood had reached a boil. Not from pain, but because the truth had just carved itself into her chest. Her father's death wasn't a stroke. It was the consequence of a political purge. She didn't cry. She stood still, and for the first time in this entire journey, she whispered one sentence, not for anyone else to hear, but to remind herself never to forget. You may have given me the name Vaughn, but you don't get to decide who I become. Naomi had never knocked on this door with trembling hands, but today every joint in her fingers felt pulled taut one side by a real fear of hearing what she didn't want to hear, and the other by something worse, that no one would say anything at all, and the silence would kill off what was left of her humanity. The room on the 39th floor where Elliot Vaughn had been honorably retired into seclusion remained untouched walnut wood, frosted bulletproof glass, a mechanical lock instead of a fingerprint scanner, and a bookshelf where not a single volume had been moved. People said he was old now, no longer involved with the board. But Naomi knew no one ever truly steps back when they still control every investment stream. She knocked 3 times. No answer. But the door opened almost as if he'd known she would come. Naomi stepped in. He stood with his back turned, looking out over the city blurred in the haze of dusk. He didn't turn around, didn't greet her, just said one line like it had been rehearsed. How long did it take you to find? Naomi stood still. She wasn't surprised. She didn't need him to explain, didn't need him to confirm. She already knew. She wasn't here to ask if he did it. She was here to ask why. You killed my father, she said, not loud, but each word heavy as lead. Elliot Vaughn exhaled slowly, still facing the window. Your father chose that death. When a man goes against the system without allies, he either changes it or gets crushed by it. Arthur refused to kneel, so I had to make sure his legacy didn't get buried with his body. Naomi stepped forward. Her eyes glinted not with tears, but a quiet kind of heartbreak, the kind that leaves you too numb to cry. So to preserve the name VaughnCorp, you killed the man who carried the name Vaughn. He turned around. For the first time, their eyes met. No regret, no remorse, only the clarity of a man who'd lived so long inside power. He no longer remembered what it meant to shake like a father or a grandfather. What do you think, VaughnCorp? Is Naomi a family business, a legacy? No, it's a machine. And if one part of the machine threatens its structure, you either replace the part or the whole machine dies. Arthur wouldn't adapt. Naomi clenched her fists. She had come here thinking she would indict him and reclaim justice for her father. But now she felt like the only one in the room who still believed justice had meaning beyond survival. He no longer fought for what was right, only for what could endure. You call that realism or just fear? she asked, her voice unsteady for the first time. Elliot stepped closer. Very close. Close enough that Naomi could see his eyes clouded, but not tired. Experience. You're young. You think the truth can change the world. But the world doesn't respond to truth. It responds to power. And if you want to live longer than your father, you need to understand something. He paused, laying a hand on her shoulder. A hand that once guided her through grand parties, once patted her back after her first speech. Now, it felt like steel. Sometimes to live rightly is to accept being a traitor in the eyes of the wrong. She removed his hand, not in anger, not in haste, just like someone waking from a long dream, finally seeing who had authored the nightmare. "No, you're wrong," she whispered. "To live rightly is to carry that betrayal, even when the world calls it foolish." Naomi turned and walked out. No permission asked, no goodbye offered. She didn't shut the door, because once the truth is opened, that door can never be closed again. The conference room on the 42nd floor had never been this quiet, not because it was empty, but because everyone was present, in fear. Naomi entered at exactly 9:00 a.m., not a minute late, not in a rush. She didn't wear black like someone mourning her father, nor red like someone asserting dominance. She wore white, simple, clean, and in stark contrast to the concealed rot that filled this space. The silver USB sat in front of her, next to an untouched glass of water. Every gaze turned toward her, as if to ask, "What are you doing here? You're just an inexperienced heir." But Naomi didn't need a title. She wasn't here to ask permission. She was here to begin. Vivian Mears, the managing director, was the first to speak. "Naomi, if you need a private meeting, I can arrange." Naomi raised her hand. Not aggressively, just a motion that made the entire room hold its breath. "Today, I'm not asking for advice. I'm asking for silence. And this USB will speak for me." She plugged the drive into the projector. The screen lit up, not with the company logo, but with black and white footage. No filters, no dramatics, just the truth. The first voice wasn't Naomi's. It was Elliot Vaughn's. "If Naomi doesn't understand, then she'll have to learn the way her father never got the chance to." The projector whirred softly. The room fell into complete silence. Some lowered their eyes. Some reached for their phones, pretending to check emails. But Naomi knew no one dared meet the truth head-on anymore. She advanced to the second slide, the power map. Familiar names lit up, accompanied by details of off-the-books payments, irregular stock bonuses, and screenshots of messages, threats disguised as private directives. Only one person spoke: Grant Whitmore, the man who had once stood beside her father. "Naomi, you're putting yourself in danger. You don't understand how deep this goes." Naomi offered a faint smile, not the smile of a naive girl, but of someone who had walked through hell and now knew exactly who had held the match. "I understand perfectly, Uncle Grant. I understand that if no one in this room dares to face the mirror, then I will become the last mirror VaughnCorp has that reflects what's right." She pulled out a printed document. It was the sworn statement of a former board member, one who had retired for health reasons. In the letter, he detailed the internal cleanup, the names erased for refusing to rewrite wrongs as rights. Harold Halbrook's name sat at the top of the list. Naomi didn't need a conclusion. She only needed to say one thing softly, yet powerfully enough for every fiber of authority in the room to realize this was no longer just a meeting. "I don't need your approval. Because I didn't come here to ask, I came to declare. From this day forward, VaughnCorp will no longer be a place where good people are called weak." Another executive, Sienna Walsh, set down her water glass with a trembling hand. It shattered. But Naomi remained as composed as if the glass had never touched the floor. I know some of you will try to push back, spin the media, call lawyers, but as my father once said, there is nothing more powerful than a truth spoken at the right time. And today, I am that moment. She pulled the USB from the port, turned off the screen. No applause, no objections, because sometimes a whisper in the boardroom echoes louder than 1,000 speeches. Naomi walked out of the room, and in the silence she left behind, she knew the storm had begun. 3 days after the boardroom showdown, the name Naomi Vaughn was known across America, not as the bold young CEO, not as the heiress who exposed her own company's corruption, but as the manipulative heiress exploiting sympathy to sway the public. Where did that story come from? From the very sources she once believed would stay silent. Epoch Financial Times ran an exclusive Naomi Vaughn, the heiress with a hidden agenda, featuring photos of Naomi leaving a luxury apartment in Manhattan, allegedly a secret property funded by settlements from her father's trust. On Twitter X, a clipped video from Naomi's board speech circulated, deliberately edited to isolate one line, "I don't need anyone's approval." It was followed by side-by-side images comparing her to failed authoritarian female leaders. Foxline News didn't miss their chance either. Is Naomi Vaughn orchestrating a corporate coup to cover up personal misconduct? Naomi sat in her office on the 38th floor. Sunlight slanted across her desk like a quiet reminder. Even with the truth in hand, the battle was never about who's right, but who controls the story. Over 200 unread emails, 16 missed calls from legal, and a leaked clip showing her shouting into a phone in the hallway captioned, "Naomi Vaughn verbally abuses staff." She didn't remember being filmed, but she remembered exactly what she said. "Don't let anyone intimidate the internal investigation team. If they're silenced, I'll escalate it to the federal level." They didn't include that part in the broadcast. Vivian Mears, the very woman Naomi had exposed, appeared suddenly on morning television as someone who supported Naomi since the beginning. Her tone softer than ever, she said, "I care for the girl." But sometimes youthful urgency burns down the very bridge it needs. "I just hope she stops before she sets herself on fire." A velvet-wrapped dagger. Naomi remained silent. No posts, no counters, no clarifications. She knew when the media becomes the battlefield, the first reaction is often the one they most want from you, so they can paint you wrong again. Instead, she regrouped. Inside a small room behind the records office once used for archive storage, Naomi sat with her core team, Louise, head of legal, Theo, investigative IT analyst, and Sarah, the media strategist, who'd once been pushed out of a flagship project. "We won't fight back with words," Naomi said. "We fight back with files, with systems, and with a truth so powerful it won't need to be shouted to make people cover their ears." Sarah gave a small smile for the first time in weeks. "Then we're not launching a campaign to defend Naomi Vaughn." Naomi looked up, surprised. Sarah continued calm and sharp. "We're launching a campaign that makes everyone ask, why are people like her attacked this viciously? And when they do, the answer won't need to be said out loud." Naomi nodded. She knew now she wasn't alone. And when your army is chosen not from polished resumes, but from hearts that refuse to bow, then the war isn't about you anymore. It's about a culture of fear, being forced to change. The rain poured relentlessly, but Naomi didn't care. She sat alone in the conference room on the 41st floor, the pale blue glow of the screen painting shadows on her sleepless face. Each decrypted file revealed damning evidence, decade-old deals, concealed transactions, secrets VaughnCorp had buried under layers of polished PR. And yet, she still felt something was missing. A final piece. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase. Then it arrived. At her lowest point, an email appeared in her private inbox, a line of communication known only to a few. No subject, no sender, no introduction. Just one line, "I'm alive, and I have everything." Naomi blinked, thinking it was a hallucination. But attached was a blurred photo of an aged handwritten note signed Elliot Vaughn. Her heart pounded. The image was real. The handwriting was her father's, once the quiet architect of American finance, once the steady helm of VaughnCorp, and the man who died leaving behind too many unanswered questions. She told no one. 3 hours later, she boarded a train out of the city. Phone powered down, laptop left behind. Destination a small town in Nebraska. The meeting place a weathered roadside cafe with no security cameras, no traffic, and nothing but silence. When she entered, the man in the corner didn't look up immediately. Gray-streaked hair, hollow eyes, and a rumpled wool coat that made him look like any forgotten drifter. But his eyes, those couldn't be mistaken. Caleb Rios, former head of internal audit. The last man to file a confidential report to the board, then vanish from every system like he'd never existed. "You've grown," he rasped, not smiling. "I thought you'd never come back to VaughnCorp, but seeing you here now, I know your father was right to believe in something bigger." Naomi said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the battered leather briefcase he clutched, his only possession. "I've lived under a false name for 5 years, drove cross-country, no credit cards, no medical records, no social accounts. I didn't want to live that way, but I needed to make sure these got to the right person." He placed the case on the table and slid it toward her. Inside were 3 items, a hard drive containing backups of erased emails, internal conversations about terminations based on image criteria, illegal fund reallocations, and coordinated media manipulation plans, a printed copy of a 2018 buried report co-signed by Caleb and her father, and finally, an unreleased audio recording her father's final message to the one successor he hoped would one day be strong enough to hear the truth. Naomi played it. Her father's voice filled the room, worn, thoughtful, but clear. "Naomi, if you're hearing this, I'm likely gone. But if you've chosen to dig this far, don't do it for our name. Do it for the people who were hurt. Do it because I never had the courage to do what was right. Don't forgive me. Just finish what I couldn't." In that moment, every weight she'd carried shifted. Not because it vanished, but because the truth finally had a face, a voice, a name, and someone willing to step out of the shadows to defend it. Back in the city, Naomi called an emergency midnight meeting. The legal team, cybersecurity specialists, Marcus. She powered on the computer and opened the files. No one spoke, only stunned gasps and pale faces. A list of 27 former complainants, over half, had vanished from the system. Concrete evidence of the brand cleansing policy used to eliminate staff deemed visually unfit for market representation. Documentation of a shadow fund siphoned from shareholder equity with signatures from senior board members. No one could deny it now. There were no exit routes left. "We are no longer managing a company," Naomi said, eyes locked on her stunned team. "We are witnesses to a crime, and if we don't stand now, we will become accomplices." On what seemed like just another Monday morning, while the city sipped lattes and rushed into meetings on the 27th floor of VaughnCorp headquarters, a man chose to break the silence he'd lived with for 9 long years. Marcus Dalton entered the press room unannounced. No introduction, no theme music, only the sound of a door swinging open and his heavy footsteps echoing through the polished space. He wore a grey suit. No badge, no assistant, no security. Just a worn leather folder in his hands. No company logo on it, more like a will than an executive document. But it was the look in his eyes that made the entire room stop breathing. Naomi, in a media strategy meeting, was pulled out only a minute before he took the podium. She didn't know what was happening, but instinct rooted her in the corner of the room, just outside the spotlight, with eyes locked on his every move. Marcus didn't take a microphone. He looked down at the front row, at colleagues, partners, subordinates from years past. Some stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Others forced polite smiles. But he knew Naomi's was the only gaze without judgment. It held only quiet expectation. His voice broke the silence, not confident, but not trembling. It sounded like a prayer repeated after too many years of silence. I was once called the balancer of VaughnCorp. I didn't make waves, didn't ask questions, kept feelings out of decisions. I thought that was neutrality, professionalism, maturity. Until I realized neutrality can be complicity, and professionalism sometimes just cowardice. Every eye was fixed on him. Naomi's heart pounded. She had doubted Marcus, the man who disappeared during every major crisis, the one always on business trips whenever the company was under media fire, the man who never looked her in the eye after Maria Renner's death. An employee quietly removed from the system, later found dead by suicide in her small Queens apartment. His voice began to tighten. Maria came to me once. She didn't want to sue. She just wanted to know. Why had she been demoted? Why was her file flagged disloyal after just one meeting, despite being the top performer in her division? I told her it was organizational restructuring. I gave her polished words, clean answers, and watched her leave my office, silent, without protest. A month later, she was gone. No one from the board attended her funeral. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot but dry. Maybe because he'd already cried all his tears alone at night beside an unsent resignation letter and internal memos he knew he should never have signed. I didn't kill Maria, but I let the system kill her by doing nothing. Then he opened the folder. Inside were memos, internal emails, documents bearing his own signature, personnel transfers with no justification. Notes from HR doesn't fit the brand image, removed from public-facing roles. And most damning a list of 27 names, 27 voices that tried to speak up. Some resigned. Some vanished from citizen records. At least 3 were dead under non-work-related personal circumstances. Naomi could no longer stand still. She stepped forward, shoulders squared, silent. But today wasn't her day to speak. Today belonged to a man who had once chosen silence and finally chose to break it. Marcus looked at her like a father, looking at the child he had never protected enough. Then he said, his final words, "Naomi, I don't know if what I've done today can save anything, but I know this. If there's one person left with the clarity to rebuild VaughnCorp from the ashes, it's you." Then he pulled out his phone, a simple act, but it rocked VaughnCorp's entire media infrastructure. He published the documents to an encrypted open-access database for journalists, independent watchdogs, employees, even customers. No rollback, no retraction. Just the truth, rough, grey, undeniable. And in that moment, no one saw a disgraced executive. They saw a man finally willing to face his guilt in front of the world. You've just witnessed a story that doesn't glorify triumph, but honors courage. The courage to walk away from power, to reject silence, and to stand firmly on the side of truth. Naomi Vaughn could have chosen to keep her seat of influence, bask in the spotlight, and carry on the legacy her father left behind. but she chose a different path. One with no applause, no standing ovation, only the sound of her heart still beating loud and unwavering for what's right. And what's the lesson here? That courage isn't always about climbing to the top. Sometimes it's simply having the strength to step down at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reasons. That truth, even buried under layers of concrete and power, can still come to light if just one person dares to believe in it. My personal view is this: no one is obligated to be a hero, but you can always choose not to be silent. Naomi gave up everything to protect the part of her that was still human, and that may be the greatest victory of all. If this story made you feel something, a sadness, a sense of empathy, or even just one moment of pause to think about what's right, then please share what you felt. And don't forget to subscribe to Toch Story, where we don't just tell stories, we reignite the belief that kindness, no matter how small, can shake an entire world.